The sun was only a pale promise over the horizon when Clara Reynolds stepped out of the dusty gray bus that had brought her to the middle of nowhere. Her suitcase thudded onto the hard-packed earth, kicking up a puff of Montana dust that clung stubbornly to her city shoes. In the distance, wide plains stretched endlessly, gold and rust under the slow, waking light, while the sound of horses echoed faintly from a nearby corral. Clara pulled her coat tighter, the chill of dawn biting through the thin fabric. The email from her editor replayed in her mind. "You'll be covering a piece on sustainable ranching. The man you're looking for is Luke Hawthorne. Try not to annoy him. He doesn't talk much." That last line had seemed almost humorous at the time. Now, standing before the massive wooden sign reading Hawthorne Ranch, established 1892, she felt the weight of it. The place wasn't just a ranch. It was a world far removed from hers, quiet, stubborn, unhurried. She started down the gravel path leading to the stables. Every step seemed to echo too loudly in the stillness. Somewhere ahead, she could hear the heavy snort of a horse and the rhythmic scrape of a shovel. And then she saw him. Luke Hawthorne stood beside a dark chestnut stallion, sleeves rolled up, sunlight spilling over his broad shoulders. He was tall, lean, and moved with the kind of deliberate calm that came from years of working with animals that didn't forgive mistakes. His hat shaded his face, but even from a distance, she could see the rough stubble on his jaw and the weathered lines that life had carved into his expression. "Morning," Clara said, trying to sound confident. Her voice carried awkwardly through the crisp air. He turned, eyes narrowing slightly, not in hostility, but in measured curiosity. "You lost?" he asked, resting the shovel on the fence. His tone was slow, deep, the kind that made silence feel heavier between words. "No," she replied, fumbling for her ID badge. "Clara Reynolds. I'm the journalist from—" "I know who you are," he interrupted quietly, glancing at the badge without much interest. "They said you'd be coming." He wiped his hands on a rag, nodding toward the ranch house in the distance. "Guest room's ready. Hope you're not scared of hard work." The corners of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but something close. Clara blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Hard work doesn't scare me," she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. She had never so much as milked a cow, let alone spent a week on a working ranch. Luke gave a small nod and turned back to the horse. The stallion pawed the dirt restlessly, its mane tangled with burrs. Clara watched, fascinated, as Luke placed a steady hand on the animal's neck, murmuring something she couldn't hear. The horse calmed almost instantly. It wasn't force, it was trust, something wordless and old as the land itself. "This one's Blaze," Luke said, glancing at her over his shoulder. "Half wild. Doesn't take kindly to strangers?" "Sounds familiar," she murmured before she could stop herself. For the first time, Luke chuckled, low and genuine. Maybe so. He went back to work, and for a long moment, Clara just stood there, watching the quiet rhythm of ranch life unfold, the soft whinny of horses, the creak of old wood, the whisper of wind through dry grass. It was a world without the hum of traffic or the glow of screens, a place that didn't care who she was or what she'd written before. And as the first rays of sun spilled across the fields, Clara realized that the real story here wasn't just about sustainable ranching. It was about the man who had built this place with his hands, and the silence he carried like a second skin. Somewhere deep inside her, a small voice whispered, "This is going to change you." By the second morning, Clara had learned one important truth about ranch life. It didn't wait for anyone. The sun wasn't even fully up when Luke's firm knock came at her door. "Coffee's on. Meet me by the corral in 10, he said through the wood, his voice rough from sleep and early morning chill. Clara groaned, rubbing her eyes. The digital clock read 5:12 a.m. In her old city life, that was an hour reserved for insomnia, not saddle work. But she'd come here to understand, to write something real. And Luke Hawthorne, she realized, wasn't the type to respect words unless they came with blisters and sweat. By the time she stepped outside, The ranch was already alive, roosters crowing, horses nickering softly, the smell of hay and dew blending into something strangely peaceful. The air was crisp and sharp, biting at her cheeks as the sun spilled pale gold over the horizon. Luke stood by the paddock, one boot on the bottom rail of the fence, coiled rope in hand. Beside him, a magnificent stallion paced in a slow, restless circle, muscles rippling beneath a dark chestnut coat. His mane was wild, his eyes almost human in their fire. "This him?" Clara asked, walking closer, her breath fogging in the cold. Luke nodded. "That's Blaze. Been trying to get him to trust the saddle for months. He's smart. Too smart for his own good. Doesn't like being told what to do." Clara smiled faintly. "Sounds like someone else I know." Luke's mouth twitched, but he didn't look at her. "You're observant, Miss Reynolds. But this one's different. You make one wrong move with him, he'll remind you he's not a pet." Clara leaned on the fence, intrigued. "So why not just force him?" Luke's head turned sharply. His voice dropped lower, quieter, but there was steel in it. "Because you can't force something wild, Clara. You break it, you lose it." His words hung between them, heavier than they should have been. For a moment, Clara saw something flicker in his eyes, a shadow of old hurt, maybe something he'd lost before. She opened her mouth to ask, but before she could, Blaze suddenly snorted and reared up, hooves striking the air. Clara gasped, stumbling back. "Hey!" Luke barked, stepping forward. His movements were quick but careful, all precision, no panic. He raised a hand, murmuring in that calm, low voice she'd heard before. The stallion's breathing slowed. A moment later, Blaze's front hooves touched the ground again, though his muscles still quivered with tension. Luke turned toward Clara, his expression unreadable. "You okay?" I didn't mean to startle him," she said, clutching her notebook. "You didn't. He's just testing you." "Testing me?" Luke nodded, finally offering a faint smile. He knows when someone's nervous. Animals are like people. They feel what you feel. You have to be gentle. If you rush him, he'll bolt. Then, in a tone softer than she expected, he added, "Be gentle. It's too fast." Clara felt something stir in her chest, the strange awareness of those words. Maybe he wasn't just talking about the horse. "I'll try," she whispered, meeting his gaze. Luke studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good, come on. I'll show you how to hold the reins." He guided her inside the corral. Their hands brushed as he passed her the rope, rough, calloused skin meeting soft city fingers. The contact was fleeting, accidental, but it sent a small current through her. "Stand your ground," he murmured from behind her, voice low and steady. "Don't pull too hard." "Let him come to you?" Clara swallowed, doing as he said. Blaze's breath steamed in the morning light as the stallion edged closer, his dark eyes fixed on her. She didn't move, just breathed, and then, miraculously, Blaze dipped his head, letting her touch his muzzle. Luke exhaled behind her, a small sound of approval. "See? Told you he'd come around." Clara turned, smiling. "Maybe he just needed a woman's touch," Luke chuckled quietly. And for the first time, the sound was warm, real. But as Blaze nuzzled her hand, Clara realized something else. It wasn't just the horse who was softening. That night, the wind came down from the mountains like a ghost. It howled through the valley, rattling the windows and filling the old ranch house with the sound of loneliness. The rain had started just after dusk, soft at first, then heavy, relentless. The storm turned the world outside into a blur of darkness and sound. Inside, the crackle of the fireplace painted the room in gold and amber. Clara sat cross-legged on the old leather sofa, her notebook resting on her lap. She wasn't writing, not really. Every time she tried to put Luke Hawthorne into words, they came out wrong. He wasn't just a man. He was a silence. A slow, steady rhythm like the beating heart of the land itself. Across from her, Luke was nursing a mug of black coffee. He'd just come in from the barn, soaked through, hair dripping from the rain. The firelight caught the sharp lines of his jaw, the faint scar running across his cheek, a remnant of a life lived hard and honest. You should dry off, Clara said gently. You'll catch cold. He gave a soft grunt that might have been a laugh. Haven't caught one yet. Guess the dust keeps me safe, she smiled, closing her notebook. You know, for a man who says so little, you sure know how to sound like a Western proverb. That earned her a real laugh, low, warm, and fleeting. Guess you've got me there, Miss Reynolds. He leaned back, eyes flicking toward the window. Storm like this usually keeps the horses uneasy. I'll check on them again before bed. Do you ever rest? She asked before she could stop herself. His gaze lingered on the flames for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. Used to. Not so much now. There was something in the way he said it. Like a door cracked open for a moment, showing a shadowed room behind it. Clara hesitated, then leaned forward. You said you lost your wife, she murmured. Was it recent? Luke didn't look at her. The fire popped softly between them. 3 years ago, he said. She got sick. Doctor said it was quick. Didn't feel quick to me. Clara's chest tightened. I'm sorry. He nodded, still watching the flames. After she passed, I thought about selling the place. Everything reminded me of her. But I couldn't do it. This ranch, it's all I've got left of who we were. Clara wanted to say something comforting, something that didn't sound rehearsed or empty. Instead, she said softly, You kept it alive. That means something. He turned his head then, and for the first time, really looked at her. His eyes, usually guarded and distant, softened. You're not like the others they've sent out here before. They all wanted a story about the rugged cowboy with a tragic past. You're different, she smiled faintly. Maybe I don't want a story. Maybe I just want to understand one. Luke's lips curved, a slow, almost imperceptible smile. Careful, Clara, understanding's dangerous. Might make you stay longer than you planned to. Her heart skipped at the quiet weight of his words. The firelight flickered, painting shadows across the room. And for a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Neither spoke after that. The silence wasn't awkward this time. It was full of warmth, of something neither of them wanted to name just yet. Eventually, Clara leaned back against the couch, the heat of the fire lulling her toward drowsiness. She watched Luke stand and walk toward the door, his hand brushing the brim of his hat. Good night, Miss Reynolds, he said softly. She smiled through half-closed eyes. Good night, Luke. When the door closed behind him, the sound of the storm returned. But it no longer felt cold. Somewhere deep inside, Clara realized something had changed. The man she came to interview was no longer just a subject for her article. He was becoming something far more dangerous, someone she wanted to know. And outside, in the quiet barn, Luke looked out into the rain, his thoughts far from the horses. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The storm passed overnight, leaving the world washed clean. The sky the next morning was a breathtaking shade of blue, the kind that only comes after heavy rain, with clouds drifting like torn silk over the endless plains. The air smelled of wet grass and earth, sharp and new. Clara stepped out of the ranch house, squinting against the sunlight. She spotted Luke near the corral, already at work as usual. His hat cast a shadow over his face, his flannel shirt damp from the early dew. There was something steady and unshakable about him. A man who moved through life with purpose, even when he carried invisible weight. Morning, she called. He turned, one brow raised. You're up early. Well, she said, adjusting her jacket. I figured I should start earning my keep. You said something about hard work, remember? That drew a small grin from him. You sure you're ready for it? She tilted her chin up. Try me. Luke nodded toward the stable. Then let's see how you do on a horse that's not trying to kill you. A few minutes later, they stood beside Willow, a gentle brown mare with kind eyes. Luke began showing her how to saddle properly, how to check the straps, tighten the cinch, and handle the reins. Clara listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she tried to lift the saddle onto Willow's back, she misjudged the weight and stumbled forward. Luke caught her arm just in time, his hand firm and warm through her sleeve. Careful, he murmured, his voice low. Be gentle. You're rushing again, Clara laughed, embarrassed. I'm not exactly built for ranch work, am I? You'll get there, he said, smiling faintly. Just don't fight it. Horses feel your nerves. They'll only calm down when you do. He stepped closer, guiding her hands. Here, like this. His chest brushed her shoulder as he adjusted her grip, his breath warm against her ear. Clara froze, her heartbeat suddenly too loud. The scent of him, leather, hay, rain, filled the air between them. See? He continued, unaware or pretending not to be. You lead with confidence. She'll follow. Clara swallowed hard. I think Willow trusts you more than me. That's 'cause she knows I mean what I say. She smiled softly. So do I. Luke paused, eyes meeting hers for the briefest second, long enough to make her chest tighten. Then he cleared his throat and stepped back. All right. Mount up. Clara hesitated, then grabbed the saddle horn and swung her leg over, almost falling in the process. Luke caught her waist, steadying her effortlessly. Easy, he said again, that same phrase threading through his every interaction with her. You're thinking too much. Just breathe. When she finally found her balance, she couldn't help laughing. You make it look easy. It's not easy, he said, watching her. You just learn to move with what you can't control. He began walking beside her as she guided Willow in slow circles around the corral. At first, every movement felt mechanical, but soon she relaxed into the rhythm. The soft sway of the saddle, the sound of hooves on damp soil, the breeze brushing her face. It felt freeing. Not bad, Luke said when she finished a lap. You ride like someone who's not afraid to fall. Maybe that's because I've already fallen a few times, she teased. Luke chuckled. Then you're ahead of most folks. The sun dipped lower, casting long golden streaks across the paddock. They stood side by side watching Willow graze near the fence. For a while, neither spoke. Then Clara broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke, when you said be gentle, back in the corral with Blaze, what did you mean? He looked at her for a long moment, the wind tugging at his hat. I meant don't rush things you want to last, he said softly. Whether it's a horse or something else. Clara's breath caught, but before she could answer, Luke turned away and headed toward the barn, leaving her heart beating too fast and her cheeks warm from more than just the sun. As she watched him go, she realized something had shifted between them. The line between teacher and student, reporter and subject, it was fading, and she wasn't sure she wanted it back. By late afternoon, the wind had begun to change. What had started as a calm, golden day slowly turned uneasy, clouds rolling in heavy and low from the mountains. The sky dimmed, and a strange stillness settled over the land. Even the horses grew restless, pacing in their stalls and snorting uneasily. Luke stood at the edge of the corral, eyes narrowed toward the horizon. Years on the ranch had taught him how to read the sky, and what he saw made his stomach tighten. Storm's coming, he muttered under his breath. Clara came running from the barn, her ponytail whipping in the wind. I just heard thunder, she said, breathless. It sounded close. It's close, all right, Luke said, tightening the strap on his coat. We need to move the horses into the shelter before it hits. Come on, I'll take the north stalls, you check the south pens. Keep calm. They'll sense your fear. Clara nodded, though her heart was pounding. She grabbed a rope and ran toward the paddock where Blaze was pacing, his coat slick with the first drops of rain. The sky cracked open with thunder as she reached him, and the stallion reared up, eyes wild with fear. It's okay, boy, she said softly, her voice trembling. It's just a storm. Behind her, lightning split the sky. Blaze jerked hard against the fence and broke through it in a flash of movement. Clara shouted his name, sprinting after him without thinking. Clara! Luke's voice roared through the wind, but she was already running into the rain. Blaze tore across the open field toward the ridge, rain pelting his flanks. Clara's boots slipped in the mud as she chased him, her breath ragged, hair plastered to her face. She could barely see. The storm was a living thing now, roaring, howling, pushing her back with every gust. Then she saw it. The ravine. Narrow, steep, and half hidden by the rising water. Blaze was trapped against it, slipping dangerously close to the edge. "Easy, Blaze," she whispered, stepping closer, palms out. The horse's chest heaved, nostrils flaring. "You're okay. I'm not gonna hurt you. Clara!" She turned just as Luke appeared through the curtain of rain, mud streaking his jeans, his hat gone. His eyes flashed with panic and fury. "What the hell are you doing? You could have been killed!" "I couldn't just let him. We'll talk later," he barked, grabbing the rope from her hands. "Help me get him out." Together they worked in silence, every movement a battle against the storm. Luke murmured to Blaze in that same low, steady voice, the one that could calm even chaos. Slowly, the stallion stopped fighting. Clara looped the rope around his neck, and with a final tug, they led him back from the ravine. By the time they reached the barn, both were drenched, trembling from exhaustion. Luke shut the door against the wind, leaning his forehead against the wood. The rain pounded above them like drums. Clara's breath came in short, uneven bursts. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think—" "No," he interrupted softly, turning to her. "You didn't, but you cared." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them hummed with something raw and unspoken. Fear, relief, gratitude, and something deeper still. Luke reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. His touch lingered longer than it should have. "You're reckless, you know that?" he said, his voice gentler now. She smiled faintly. "Guess I learned from the best." He huffed a small laugh, shaking his head. "You scare me more than the damn storm." Then came silence, heavy, electric. Clara looked up at him, her heart racing faster than the rain outside. His hand was still on her cheek, his thumb tracing a line down to her jaw. "Luke," she whispered. He froze, every muscle tight. For a heartbeat, it seemed like he might pull away, but then he didn't. Instead, he leaned in slowly, the smell of rain and hay and warmth filling the space between them. The thunder outside rolled again, and for one fragile moment, everything else disappeared. Their lips met softly, hesitant, almost disbelieving, a spark in the dark that neither of them had expected, but both had been waiting for. When they finally parted, Clara's eyes were bright with something she couldn't name. Luke looked away, his chest rising and falling. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he murmured. "I know," she whispered. But it did. Outside, the storm began to fade, its fury giving way to soft, steady rain, like the world itself was catching its breath. Morning came quietly after the storm. The world outside was still, washed clean, glistening beneath the soft light of dawn. Dew clung to the grass like scattered diamonds, and the air smelled of earth and new beginnings. But inside the ranch house, silence hung heavier than the night before. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her notebook open in front of her. She hadn't written a single word. The pages stared back at her, blank, accusing. She had everything she needed. The story of a solitary rancher fighting to preserve a dying tradition, his bond with the land, his quiet heroism. But the words she wanted to write weren't just about the ranch. They were about him, and that terrified her. The kiss still lingered, soft, unexpected, seared into her memory. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the warmth of his touch, the steady heartbeat beneath his rain-soaked shirt. But when she'd woken, Luke was already gone. Now, hours later, she found him outside, repairing the storm-broken fences. His hat shaded his eyes, his movements precise, methodical. There was no sign of last night in his face, no hesitation, no warmth. Only the quiet rhythm of work. "Morning," she said cautiously. He didn't look up. "You sleep all right?" "I did," she hesitated. "Luke, about last night—" "Don't," he interrupted softly. His voice was calm, but it cut deep. "It was the storm. Long day, adrenaline, emotions running high. You don't owe me an explanation." Clara stared at him, her chest tightening. "Maybe I want to explain." He stopped hammering, the tool hanging loose in his hand. "Then don't. Don't turn this into something it isn't." His words hit harder than the wind. She took a step closer. "You think I imagined it? That I didn't feel anything?" He finally looked at her, eyes shadowed, jaw clenched. "You're leaving in 2 days, Clara. You'll write your story, it'll get printed in some magazine, and I'll still be here, fixing fences and chasing horses. That's my life. You don't belong in it." She opened her mouth to argue but found herself speechless. For a long moment they just stood there, the only sound the creak of the wooden fence and the wind whispering through the grass. Finally, she said softly, "You think I came here just for a story?" Luke exhaled, setting the hammer down. "That's your job. Nothing wrong with that." Her voice trembled. "You're wrong. I came here to understand something real, and I found it. You. This place. What you've built. I don't care about the article anymore." He turned away, shaking his head. "You don't mean that." "Yes, I do," she said, her voice rising. "I want people to know what this ranch means, how hard you fight to keep it alive. The land, the animals. It's beautiful, Luke. People should see that." For the first time, his stoic expression faltered. Beneath the gruffness, there was something raw. Pain, pride, and something like fear. "I don't need pity," he said quietly, "and I sure as hell don't need saving." Clara took a step forward, her voice gentler now. "It's not pity. It's truth. You told me once to be gentle, remember? I am, but I won't pretend I don't care." Luke's shoulders dropped slightly, the fight leaving him. His voice was barely a whisper. "You shouldn't." "Too late," she said. For a moment, neither moved. The distance between them was small, just a few steps, but it felt like a canyon. Finally, Luke turned to face her fully, his eyes filled with everything he couldn't say. "Clara," he murmured, "if I let you in, you'll just leave. Everyone does." Her heart broke at the quiet honesty in his voice. She reached out, her fingers brushing his rough hand. "Then let me stay until I have to go. No promises, no pretending, just truth." Luke stared at her for a long moment, then finally nodded, a slow, wordless surrender. And in that fragile, breathless silence, something shifted between them. It wasn't just attraction now, it was trust, hesitant but real, blooming like new grass after the storm. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of horses calling to one another, the ranch coming back to life, and for the first time, Luke Hawthorne allowed himself to hope. The last morning arrived too soon. The air was cool and thin, filled with the scent of wild sage and pine carried from the distant hills. The ranch was unusually still. No hammering, no shouting, no rhythm of chores echoing across the yard. Even the horses seemed subdued, as if they too understood that something was ending. Clara stood on the porch, suitcase by her side, staring out at the horizon painted in pale gold. Her article was finished, tucked neatly into her bag, but it didn't feel like victory. The words didn't sound like journalism anymore. They sounded like goodbye. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Luke stood there, hat in hand, his expression unreadable. The early sun caught in his eyes, those deep, quiet eyes that had watched her, taught her, and unknowingly changed her. "So," he said, voice rough. "You heading out soon?" Clara nodded. "The bus comes at noon." Luke gave a short nod. "You got time for one last ride?" The question surprised her. "Now?" "Now," he said simply. "Blaze has been calmer lately. Figured you'd want to see him before you go." Clara hesitated, then smiled softly. "Yeah, I'd like that." They rode out together into the open fields, the wind tugging gently at their clothes, the morning sun climbing higher. Blaze moved smoothly beneath her, his once wild energy now calm and steady, a reflection of everything that had changed between them. Luke rode beside her on his bay mare, his movements fluid, his silence comfortable. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The land stretched endlessly around them, open, eternal, forgiving. When they reached the ridge overlooking the valley, Luke pulled the reins, stopping to take in the view. The grass swayed below like a green ocean, the fences winding through it like old scars. Clara slowed Blaze beside him. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Yeah," Luke replied. "Never gets old." He took off his hat, resting it against his leg. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind filled the silence, soft and wistful. Then Clara turned to him. "You know, I almost didn't come," she said. "I thought it'd just be another story. A few photos, a couple interviews, some poetic ending for the city readers." Luke's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Doesn't sound too bad. But then I met you," she continued, her voice trembling. "And suddenly it wasn't a story anymore. It was real, and I don't know how to leave something that feels real." Luke's gaze softened. He looked away toward the horizon. "You were never meant to stay here, Clara. You've got a whole world waiting out there. This place, it's not much. Just dirt fences and a few stubborn horses. It's you," she said. "That's what makes it something." He exhaled slowly, his throat tight. "You'll forget about me." "I won't," she whispered. "How could I?" Luke turned toward her then, the weight of emotion in his eyes raw and unguarded. "If things were different, they're not," she said gently, finishing for him. For a long moment the world held still, no sound but the whispering grass and the creak of saddles. Clara reached out and touched his hand where it rested on the reins. Her fingers fit easily against his rough skin, and he didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For letting me see who you really are." Luke swallowed hard, then gave her a small nod. "Be gentle out there," he said, echoing the words that had followed them from the beginning. "The world moves too damn fast," Clara smiled through tears. "I'll try." They rode back in silence, side by side, until the ranch came into view again. The barn, the fences, the familiar lines of a life she'd come to love. When they dismounted, Luke took Blaze's reins, his hand brushing hers for just a second too long. "You tamed him," he said quietly. Clara shook her head. "No, he just needed someone to believe he could be free." Luke's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Guess that makes two of us." The sound of the approaching bus echoed faintly in the distance. Clara turned to go, her heart heavy, her throat tight. But before she reached the porch, Luke called after her. "Clara!" She turned. He hesitated, then simply said, "You'll always have a place here." Her eyes glistened. "And you'll always have one in here," she said, pressing a hand over her heart. And then she was gone, the dust from the bus rising behind her like a memory dissolving into sunlight. Luke stood there long after she disappeared down the road, the wind tugging gently at his shirt. The ranch was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty anymore, because for the first time in years, hope lived there, quiet, patient, and waiting. Winter had come and gone by the time Luke Hawthorne saw her again. The Montana spring arrived quietly, the kind that didn't announce itself with blossoms or fanfare, but with small, tender things, a warm wind, green shoots pushing through the mud, the sound of water trickling where snow once lay. Life was creeping back into the ranch, slow and sure. Luke moved through his days with the same quiet rhythm he always had, mending fences, tending to the foals, keeping the ranch alive. But something had changed. He still woke before dawn, still ate his meals in silence, yet there was a lightness to him now, a memory that lingered behind every thought. Sometimes he'd catch himself glancing toward the ridge where they'd last ridden together, half expecting to see her silhouette against the sunrise. He'd shake his head, smile to himself, and keep working. And then one afternoon, she came back. He heard the sound of a truck long before he saw it, the crunch of tires on gravel, the hum of an unfamiliar engine. Luke wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside, the sunlight catching the brim of his hat. A blue pickup stopped near the barn, dust swirling around it. The driver's door opened and Clara stepped out. For a moment, Luke just stared. She looked different, her hair a little shorter, her jacket dusted with travel, her city polish softened by something he couldn't quite name. But her eyes, they were the same, bright, searching alive. She smiled a little nervously. "Hey, cowboy!" Luke blinked, speechless for once. "You came back. I told you I might," she said softly. "Though technically I never said when," he chuckled under his breath. "You sure picked a quiet day?" "That's kind of what I was hoping for." She hesitated. then reached into her bag and pulled out a folded magazine, Frontier Living, the publication she'd been writing for. On the cover was a photo of the ranch at sunset, Blaze in the field and Luke in the distance, silhouetted against the sky. The title read, The Man Who Spoke to the Wild. Luke took it from her, his calloused fingers brushing the glossy paper. He stared at the photo for a long moment, then at her. "You did it." Clara smiled, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. "You were right. I wrote about the land, the horses. But mostly I wrote about the man who kept them alive." He looked away, swallowing hard. "People liked it?" "It went viral, Luke. Donations poured in, grants, visitors. The ranch is safe now. You don't have to sell. You did it." He nodded slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "We did it." A long silence settled between them, heavy with things neither had said. Finally, Luke looked up, his gaze soft. "Why'd you really come back, Clara?" She took a deep breath. "Because every place I went after this felt too fast, too loud, too empty. And I kept hearing your voice, telling me to be gentle, to slow down. I think I finally listened." Luke's lips curved in a small, trembling smile. He took a hesitant step closer. "And what happens now?" Clara smiled through her tears. "Maybe I stay for a while. If you'll have me." He studied her for a long moment, the wind tugging gently at his shirt. Then, in that slow, deliberate way of his, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, just like he had that night in the barn. "Be gentle," he whispered. "It's too fast." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Luke, I think we've both been slow enough, and this time?" When he kissed her, there was no hesitation, no storm, only the steady warmth of something earned, something real. The horses neighed in the distance. The wind rustled the tall grass, and for the first time in years, Luke Hawthorne didn't feel like the world was passing him by, because now it wasn't just a ranch he came home to. It was her. And in that quiet Montana spring, under a sky wide and endless, they began again, gently, slowly, perfectly in their own time.